Welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. I'm Stacy Schmidt. The second and final presidential debate is now in the history books. And after having a night to reflect on what was said and perhaps what was not said, I want to bring in our analysts right now, and I'm going to introduce them to you. As always, joining us is former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as State Attorney General and also as U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Joining us on the Democratic side of the table is Jim Byrne. Jim served as the State Democratic Party chairman. He also served as the chairman of the Allegheny County Council and also as mayor of Millvale. And Jim is an attorney here in Pittsburgh. Now we're going to switch to the Republican side once again. We find Keith Schmidt. Keith's background is strong in politics. He goes back to the Reagan campaign of 1980. Keith was the state director for former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum, a Republican. He also served as an advisor to Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith now has his own consulting firm here in Pittsburgh. And also on the Democratic side, we're going to find Amanda Green Hawkins. Amanda served as National Committee woman representing Pennsylvania to the Democratic National Party. She also served on Allegheny County Council and is currently an attorney for a major union based here in Pittsburgh. So let's talk about what happened last night, or perhaps what didn't happen. I'm going to start with you, Amanda. Yesterday, you said that you wanted the president to be more presidential in this debate last night from your perspective as a Democrat. Was he?
I think he was. I think that he should be voted most improved performer, certainly, because he was able to contain himself, respond to questions. Perhaps he went off base sometimes with his answers, but politicians do that. We say that all the time. But I think he was certainly more controlled in this setting, and I think it was great. It was certainly most improved debater here, and I think it served the public well too.
All right, so you kind of liked last night's debate then?
Much more than the first one, yes, indeed.
All right, Governor, your thoughts?
Well, I wasn't screaming at the TV. It was calm. They debated the issues. I go back to say, they truly aren't debates. They're just, let me put out my position and let me argue with you a little bit. But as I agree with Amanda, it was much improved. And I think the people of this country got to see both sides a little bit better and certainly much calmer, which is, if anything, that's what we need coming into the last few days of the election.
Jim Byrne, were you satisfied with the debate as well?
It was much better than the first one. I think we will all be in agreement on that. The first one was a debacle. Much more statesmanship from the president last night. There were opportunities for him to really go off the rails. He didn't. He went a little off the rails, which was refreshing to see him not go totally into incoherence. So, good for him. Is it enough to change people's minds? Is it enough to get people who are what little or left undecided to jump into his camp? I don't think so. It was a reinforcement of the positions of the two candidates to the extent, and I do believe the polls are accurate that Mr. Trump is falling behind. To the extent he needed to throw some type of a haymaker last night to shift the direction of this race with a week and a half to go, he wasn't able to do that. This was more closing argument to both sides to get their folks and supporters out to vote.
Well, it's interesting you bring up about the closing argument, because Keith, that is what you said the president had to do last night, and you were happy to see that they were going to have closing arguments.
Yeah, I just really wonder what the heck happened last night. I tuned in for the WWF and I got C-SPAN. I was completely amazed that we actually had an hour and a half of discourse between the sitting president of the United States and his Democratic opponent who wants the job. And one thing happened last night. I think the whole 90 minutes in large part was a closing argument, because the American people, if you literally sat down on your couch or at your dinner table or somewhere in your house and viewed all 90 minutes, you recognize the fact that there could not be two more different candidates running for the same office. They don't agree on much. They don't agree on national security or immigration or healthcare or the environment or taxes or job creation. So you have a clear choice here. And one believes in the entrepreneurial spirit of Americans and true capitalism, and that's the President of the United States. And the Vice President, to his credit, he's believed it for the last 50 years. It has more of a socialistic approach to things. He believes you can tax and spend your way into prosperity. And he believes the government's always the answer. And I think the president believes in many times the government is the impediment. But I'll end with this. The one, sometimes I wonder if he gets his prep right, the president, or if he listens to anybody. But somebody prepped him yesterday, because the one thing he did, and did it effectively, and I've been asking him to do this in the campaign to do it for weeks, is point out the fact that Joe Biden wasn't Clinton's vice president in the 1990s. He was Obama's vice president less than 4 years ago. And he didn't come to Washington in 2013 or 2003 or 1993 or 1983. He came to Washington almost 50 years ago in 1973. And now 47 years later, 2 years before he's hugging his 80th birthday, he has all the answers. It's an awakening. It's great revelation. He's going to solve all the world's problems. Well, let me tell you, for 47 years, he hasn't got it right. I'm not giving him the keys to try again.
All right. Jim, your response to that?
I'm so shocked that you came to me first after that. Okay, let's do it. He has been there for 47 years. He was President Obama's vice president. He worked with President Obama to orchestrate one of the greatest economic recoveries in the history of this great republic. After the issues we had, after almost going into a Great Depression, he worked on funding to save the auto industry when Republicans fought him and the president on it. He worked through 8 years of obstructionism with Mitch McConnell and others to block court appointments and to behave in a hypocritical fashion. So he is familiar. And here's what he does bring with 50 years of public honorable service. He brings experience. He brings a steady hand. He brings calm to the storm of COVID that this president doesn't know how to handle, that this president mismanaged. We lose 1,000 Americans a day to COVID with 70,000 new cases per day of COVID. And Keith, you said it in July, you said it in June, you said it in May. This president will be judged at the end game in October by how he's managing the COVID crisis. I couldn't agree with you more. And on that front, he gets an F-. He has no plan. He has never instituted the War Powers Act to get us ahead of the curve. He doesn't wear masks. He has these COVID cluster rallies all across America. Every single state now has a spike in this horrific, fatal disease because of the mismanagement of this president. And I know we're going to get to some of the data in key states and other states later in this show. That is a troubling, ominous sign for this president who has failed all of us.
Okay, let's move on to another part of what was said last night. And that would be, and I'm going to ask Governor Corbett this first. Mr. Biden may have raised some eyebrows, especially here in Western Pennsylvania, when he said that he would get rid of the oil and gas industry. And when he was asked that, Mr. Biden said yes. Mr. Trump said, would he close down the oil industry? Would you close down the oil industry? And Mr. Biden said, I would transition from the oil industry, yes, because the oil industry pollutes significantly. Is this going to hurt him at all in Pennsylvania, Mr. Corbett?
Well, I would think so, but frankly, is it going to hurt him with new people? I don't know, because I think those people were probably already opposed to him. They were probably already with the president on it. They've understood where his positions were. He was doubling down on green energy. That's fine. And frankly, I think he was appealing to his base and making sure that his base knew that he was with them. But, you know, when he continues to waffle a little bit exactly about what he means about fracking, and if you look at the different ads and different stories on it, he has moved around on it, going all the way back to the debates in the primary. Now he's for no fracking on federal lands. Well, that's a good way to distinguish it, but people take that as no fracking. People on both sides of the aisle are going to say, well, that's no fracking at all. And then he enforced that with saying, we're going to get out of the oil business, I forget, 10, 15 years from now. I don't think anybody envisions us being out of the oil business in 10 or 15 years. I don't think that alternative energy is going to be anywhere near sufficient enough to meet the huge demands that we have in this country, let alone this region, for electricity and for power. So did he hurt himself? He probably hurt himself with the people that he's already in trouble with. The people he's not in trouble with, no. So who's there? Who's in the middle? I think we all are wondering who's still in the middle. With 47 million people have already voted, we know they're out of it. So who's there, and did it impact? I'm not sure it impacted at all.
Well, Governor, I have to follow up with this question because you were governor. You have some indication of this, and that is, how important is the oil and gas industry here in Pennsylvania? If it were to go away, what kind of significant impact would that have on the state?
It is tremendously important, and both sides, Republicans and Democrats, know how important it is. I mean, I see times where our county executive is out there talking about the development of the Shell plant over in Beaver County, what that means for jobs, what it means for ancillary jobs, not directly involved in the industry, but downstream and upstream. So if we were to suddenly in the next few years just close down the oil industry, and I mean few years by 10, 15, there are going to be a lot of jobs that are going to go missing at that point in time. So in Western Pennsylvania, I think some of the Democrats in Western Pennsylvania may have been cringing at that, particularly some here in Allegheny County, definitely in Beaver, Washington, and those counties. So, whoa, don't go that far.
Right.
So I think it's important.
Amanda, were you cringing last night?
I wasn't, because I understand what transition means. It means that you use the old while you're still developing the new, and that takes time. And we want to see, I'll say there are a lot of people who want to see transitioning from fossil fuels to other forms of energy. And if we're going to grow our economy, we always have to be thinking of new ways to do things. And developing other sources of energy is definitely another way to develop those jobs and develop technology, and also to help clean up the air. Something that Vice President Biden mentioned was the impact that oil has on the environment. And I don't think anyone can deny that. And when we're talking about, what have you done for the Black community, what you've done for poor people, and we're talking about poor families living in environments where they're developing higher rates of asthma, and all the president wants to talk about how people are getting paid, I had no idea what he was talking about. Because if those people could afford to, they would live somewhere else where the air was better for them and their children. And so it's important to get rid of it altogether. I see it as we run parallel resources to develop energy.
Okay, we're having a little bit of
That would have
issue
been
with-
nicely said if he would have said parallel, but he didn't say it that way.
Right.
Okay.
My Democratic counterparts could spin this all they want, but they're putting lipstick on a pig. It's the wrong comment to make here in Pennsylvania. You don't have to be in the oil and gas industry to be affected by the oil and gas industry. My parents and my brothers and sisters lived through, and myself lived through the steel industry. I wasn't directly involved in the steel industry, but I understood how that affected the well-being of my family and my neighbors and my community. As far as the fracking comments, he said, post a video. Well, they didn't post a video. They posted 7 videos of various times in which the vice president spoke on fracking in the last year to 18 months. So there is a real concern. And I've said time and time again, listen, there isn't a path to a popular vote victory. There's an electoral path for the president. And we all know late at night in 2016, it was the electoral college votes in Pennsylvania that put him over the top. This is still, I think, ground zero if this indeed is as close a race as I believe it is. So those comments are troubling to the working families in Pennsylvania and those others like myself and others that are directly involved economically if the oil and gas industry takes a punch in the face.
Keith, I'll ask you this, because you were an advisor to Senator Santorum. Would you advise the president to hammer that home here now in Pennsylvania? Are we going to see more ads about that? You think of what the vice president said last night?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was thinking in my own mental preparation for today. People pivot at the end. You take some things off of comments from debates like this, and you try to put it in your ads. But I can tell you, it's not going to be a national ad. I think they're going to run they have a certain strategy that they're going to implement in these last 9 or 10 days. But here in Pennsylvania, I would be shocked if they literally don't take clips from last night's debate and replay them to the citizens of Pennsylvania in these closing days.
All right, Keith, thank you. Jim, if the Republicans are to do that, the president's camp, as a former state party chairman, would that concern you at all?
No, because this is a move, counter move. This is a chess game, and both sides know what the other side will do, especially as we get into the last 2 weeks. Due to the micro targeting, both camps know what the algorithms are telling them in every single state. A message that will resonate in Western Pennsylvania on issues of fracking, on issues of moving to clean energy, are issues that may not resonate in one of the other swing states. Talk about fracking down in Florida, it won't play. So the micro targeting that both camps have speaks to them about what their voters need to hear to come out and what the undecideds need to hear to flip them to their side. So it's something the Democratic Party expects to hear. They already have the responses, and I think the governor and Amanda hit on those responses. Joe Biden nailed it last night. You do not get rid of this industry, but while this industry is in play, while this industry is needed, while this industry is relevant, you look down the field for other options and other opportunities for economic growth through other means of acquiring energy. It is a quantum solution to a problem. The president, conversely, only thinks binary when it comes to this issue. He can't see past fracking. He can't see past oil. Mr. Biden sees those things as necessary, but he's looking for alternatives to move to a cleaner future. So that's going to be the pushback. So if the R's try to hit Western Pennsylvania with micro-targeting messaging like that, they're going to get an immediate counter on that counter, plus things that are damaging to President Trump in Western Pennsylvania, particularly COVID, unemployment, the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think it's distinguishable from what Keith was mentioning about the steel industry. One of the biggest criticisms for the steel industry during the downturn in the 80s was that there was no development in other technology to help make manufacturing steel faster, stronger, and more competitive, which is why others were able to come in and basically get in on the market. And I think when we're talking about transitioning and developing alternative fuels, you're having something going along at the same time so that people can adjust. It gives people time to adjust, to get training necessary so that they can enter other industries as needed.
Yeah, I'm going to say this to you on training other people and as you transition out of something. There was no time necessarily to transition out of the steel industry, but there were time and time again efforts made to retrain people, and all we saw was people leaving the Pittsburgh area. I mean, so sometimes the idea of retraining, I don't think necessarily works. It's just my opinion. You guys can beat up on me on this one. I don't care. But
it depends if you have time.
Different time. That's the key word. The steel industry, there was no time to prepare for that. It collapsed. So as Western Pennsylvania, Southwest PA tried to reinvent itself, people couldn't wait around for the reinvention. They didn't have a choice. Many tried to stay, many tried to re-educate. Unfortunately, many had to leave. And in this instance, which is the big significance, there is time. And Professor Mystic wrote a great article in the Tribune Review 3 or 4 years ago about the ability of Southwest Pennsylvania to come together as a community and to be strong and to be innovative. Because in the old days, when the settlers went over the Appalachians and settled down at the point in this area until the winter passed, you had to look out for each other or you were not going to make it. And in that sense of reinvention and community still resonates in this part of the country. So we went through this with the collapse of steel 35 years ago, and we didn't have time, but we made it. Our universities and our hospitals are the best in the world because we found a way to reinvent ourselves without the luxury of time. Imagine what we can do in Western Pennsylvania with the luxury of time that we have now, with a heads up from this vice president, and hopefully in 2 weeks, our next president, to make reasonable transitions without compromising jobs. That's a bright future, and people in Western Pennsylvania who have lived it will certainly buy into this because it's real.
Let me add on in a different way. I agree the training is very important. And what's happened since the development of natural gas, really in the last less than 10 years, maybe a little more than 10 years, is that individuals, workers, business, all understand the value of that to our country and to our economy, particularly here in southwestern Pennsylvania, to the point that labor and industry working together along with government have come up with training programs in the natural gas industry. And when you're talking about, when he's talking about, well, we're going to end it down the road, I'm sure that a young man at 25 or a young woman at 25 or 30 that's getting involved in that is going, well, why am I getting trained here if they're going to get rid of it? So you got to be careful what you say, but you can't be careful in debates like that. I did want to make the comment that during the debate, he said that we'll subsidize the alternative energies. We're already subsidizing alternative energies. Wind energy has been tremendously subsidized, and without the subsidies, it wouldn't be able to function. It wouldn't be able to survive. So we can continue, but we have something that I think is of value to Western Pennsylvania for at least 100 years. Why would we want to go away from it? Natural gas is what environmentalists said 25 years ago. We should quit burning coal. We should go to natural gas. But once we go to natural gas, now they're saying, oh no, we got to quit using natural gas too. From my perspective, we won't satisfy the environmentalists. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm worried about the people who are trying to get jobs in Pennsylvania. And what we saw with the industry leaving, the steel industry leaving, is what was my motivation in getting the Shell cracker plant and the development of natural gas here in Western Pennsylvania.
Okay, let's move on to something else. And Governor, I'm going to stay with you. And when we started this some time ago, you said polls really don't mean anything until you get about 2 weeks outside the election. Well, we're less than 2 weeks outside of the election. The latest Real Clear Politics average of polls for Pennsylvania shows that Mr. Biden has a 5.1% lead over the president right now. Biden is at 49.6. The president is at 44.5. Your thoughts as we now are about 11 days away from election day?
If I recall correctly, we're pretty close to where we were 4 years ago.
Oh, you're stealing my thunder. I was going to come back with that one, but you're absolutely
We're
right.
real close to where we were 4 years ago. And the fact that we had the vice president coming to Allegheny County today, the fact that they're putting the emphasis in spending their time, their money, and time is worth money, coming to Pennsylvania repeatedly tells me their internal polls, and as Jim said, the micro targeting of who they're going to get out. I suspect I know for one of the reasons that Trump won 4 years ago is they got people to come out and vote who had never voted before and may not have voted since. And they're targeting them to come back out again. And it seems, looking at the registration the Republicans did across Pennsylvania in the last year, it seems like it may be working. So when we see 5 points, 6 points, I don't want that, from my perspective, to discourage either side from coming out to vote. It's a snapshot. We don't know what the margin of errors is on that. It's an average, but if it's 5 points come Tuesday morning, maybe it means something. But he won 4 years ago. Really, nobody thought he was going to win, and he did.
Jim, the governor points out, and I was going to point this out as well. 4 years ago, Mrs. Clinton had a 46.3 lead to Mr. Trump's 41.3, a 5-point lead. We're talking 5.1 for Biden right now, 5 points for Mrs. Clinton 4 years ago. Are you concerned over these kind of numbers right now?
Well, the chairman in me, which tapped into the former goaltender I used to be, I could have been in goal and it could have been 3-0 with 2 minutes left, and I was still nervous. So of course I'm nervous. And we saw what happened 4 years ago. Anytime there's a lead, you worry about your side, especially when you're on the top end of a poll, becoming complacent or thinking that they have it in the bag. It is dangerous right now, dangerous for any Democrat or any Biden supporter to assume that they have this thing. You have to work hard for the next 10 days and use those polls as rocket fuel to drive your energy to ensure that they stay where they are. And if not, make sure that they expand further than where they are. A big difference between this cycle and the 2016, however, the support of the Secretary Clinton was not as solid as the support for Mr. Biden. There was still somewhat an element of persuadable with respect to those who were in the Clinton camp, and she lost them in the last 2 weeks by her non-appearances and other issues. She just had trouble connecting with people. Mr. Biden does not have that problem. This advantage is much more solid. And a very telling point across the country, not just Pennsylvania, in certain demographics, seniors and others who were strong for Trump 4 years ago are now with Joe Biden. Women voters in the swing states, in Pennsylvania, the margins are about the same. He's still up about 7 points with women voters, Mr. Biden, matching Secretary Clinton. And she won the women vote in Florida by 4 or 5 points 4 years ago. Biden's double digits. Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio. She had maybe a 5 to 7 point advantage over Trump with women voters. Not this time. Mr. Biden has double digit support. In some instances, 20, 30 point advantages. And it's no accident that the Lincoln Project, who's doing all this work in these states, is showing results. For example, Trump won Ohio last time by 450,000 votes. It's now a dead heat. Mr. Biden will not win Kansas, but Mr. Trump trounced Hillary Clinton there. It is a 4 or 5 point difference there. Texas is in play. Georgia is in play. So there's a collapse of Republican support for this president, and that's going to have an effect as well on election night. But back to your answer, be concerned, or your question, be concerned about a 5 point lead. Trump could still win this state. The Democrats really have to drive this home aggressively for the next week and a half.
Well, Amanda,
Well,
given
Jim
what
has
Jim
talked
just,
about us losing every demographic and lopsided this, lopsided that. And you start the commentary by saying we're about the same percentage we were 4 years ago in Pennsylvania. So I'd like to know where all the places that the president gained, because you're telling me it's the same number as it was 4 years ago. So I'll have to study those numbers. And next week, I'll tell you all the demographics that the president must have shot through the roof in the last 4 years. But the reality is we didn't have an election like 2016 since 1948, when there wasn't one poll that had Harry Truman winning re-election. Well, there wasn't one poll 4 years ago that had the president winning this election. So at this point, we have the current person that happened to running again for re-election. We know that when it comes to polling, he's an anomaly. Either people lie or disingenuous. I don't know what the reason is, but you should certainly be concerned, especially because of the fact that the polls I looked at preparing for this program had 5, 6, and even 7 points closing in on last year's on 2016's election, and somehow we had a popular vote victory in Pennsylvania. So you should be concerned about that, especially on the heels of the fact in the last month I've been telling you about the shift in resources by the Republican National Committee and state parties, Republican state parties across the country, but specifically in battleground states where it's about registration, and they have done the job in registration that they haven't done since the Republican Party organized under Abraham Lincoln. And none of those people, I can tell you, none of them are showing up on polling. So if we have an advantage of 150,000 plus new registrations over the Democrats in Pennsylvania, if you don't think that's going to make a difference, you're dead wrong.
2 quick points. My points in my prior remarks, the second half of my comments were on the undercurrents. The undercurrents are different, very different than they were 4 years ago. That's what I was trying to say. That cannot be debated. With respect to the Republicans signing up twice as many voters in Pennsylvania than the Democrats, okay, that's only one part of a 3-part equation. Identify the person, build the relationship, sign them up, maintain the relationship, and then 3, get them to the polls. There is no data that the Republicans have that these 180,000 they signed up are all coming out 100% for Trump, if at all, because they only check the first of the 3 boxes. So those are my 2 counters.
You're hopeful there, Jim.
Yeah, I was just saying.
Very hopeful.
Most likely voters are new
Signed up.
voters.
I think they're coming to the polls.
Absolutely.
The only poll that matters is election day. That's
Right.
all I keep saying. Because I keep remembering 2016, right? And people got complacent. And I'm telling voters, any voter, listen, depending on who you want, you have to get out there and make sure you exercise your right to vote, because you can't count on someone else to go and do the work. Because guess what? The result could be far different than you actually planned. So go do your part, make sure you vote, and that's the only way to really make sure that your voice counts and to say that you really had a part in helping our democracy. Don't pay attention to the polls.
all right. You know what? I think that's a great way to end our program today, because I don't think either Keith or the governor would argue with that. And I'm sure that Jim
No,
would also.
100% agree.
Yep, absolutely. So we will do this again next week. Thank you all for joining us on Around the Table, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks,
Thank
Stacy.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend.